Picture stepping onto the tarmac, the engines of your $70 million Bombardier, Global 7500, humming only to have a smug pilot block your path and say, "Service staff uses the rear and you're late." Naomi Preston. A self-made logistics billionaire didn't scream or throw a tantrum. Instead, she checked her Rolex. Exactly 9 minutes later, that pilot, the flight attendant, and the entire ground crew were escorted off the tarmac jobless and humiliated. Here's how brutal karma destroyed them. Autumn winds whipped across the sprawling concrete of Teterboro Airport, carrying the sharp, unmistakable scent of jet fuel and expensive leather. Teterboro, tucked away in New Jersey, just miles from Manhattan, was the undisputed playground of the ultra-wealthy. It was a place where billionaires, celebrities, and titans of industry bypassed the misery of commercial air travel trading TSA lines for immediate access to their private fleets. Naomi Preston loved the smell of this airport. It smelled like efficiency. At 38 years old, Naomi was the founder and CEO of Apex Freight and Logistics, a global supply chain empire that had revolutionized next-day delivery networks across 3 continents. She had built her company from a single leased warehouse in Detroit to a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut. Today she was scheduled to fly to Geneva for a critical board meeting, and her chariot awaited a pristine, custom-built Bombardier, Global 7500. Tail number N884NP. Despite her staggering net worth, Naomi dressed for comfort on long-haul flights. She wore a charcoal cashmere sweater, tailored black leggings, and a pair of pristine white sneakers. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, no-nonsense bun, and the only piece of jewelry she wore was a vintage Rolex Daytona, a gift she had bought herself after her company's initial public offering. She carried a battered leather duffel bag that had been with her since her startup days. She didn't look like the typical Teterboro billionaire. She didn't have an entourage and assistant carrying her bags or a tiny dog in a designer purse. She pushed through the heavy glass doors of the executive FBO, the fixed base operator terminal, and stepped into the hushed, hyper-luxurious lobby. The interior was a study in intimidating wealth, featuring Italian marble floors, abstract sculptures, and a complimentary espresso bar stocked with beans imported from private estates in Colombia. Behind the mahogany reception desk stood Bradley Harrison, the FBO operations manager. Bradley was a man who wore his minor authority like a king's crown. His suit was a little too tight, his hair a little too gelled, and his entire demeanor screamed of someone who worshipped the wealthy but resented anyone he deemed beneath him. Naomi approached the desk. Bradley didn't look up from his computer monitor. He continued typing deliberately, making her wait. It was a classic power play. "Good afternoon," Naomi said, her voice calm and measured. "I'm here for the departure of N884NP. Bradley finally stopped typing. He let his eyes drag slowly up from her sneakers, past her leggings, lingering briefly on her duffel bag before finally meeting her gaze. His expression immediately shifted into one of bored condescension. "Catering deliveries go around to the side entrance," Bradley said, his voice dripping with forced patience. "You can't be in the main passenger lounge." Naomi blinked mildly, amused, but instantly recognizing the undertone. It wasn't the first time she'd been mistaken for the help, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Being a young black woman in spaces traditionally dominated by older white men often resulted in these exhausting microaggressions. "I'm not catering," Naomi replied smoothly, refusing to let her smile falter. "I'm the passenger for N884NP, the Bombardier Global 7500. Bradley let out a short nasal laugh. "Right, the Apex Logistics jet. Listen, sweetheart, I have the manifest right here. That plane is reserved for the CEO of the company. If you're some junior administrative assistant trying to deadhead a flight, you need a signed authorization form from corporate. And even then, you don't use the VIP lobby." "I don't need a corporate authorization form," Naomi said, her tone dropping a fraction of a degree in temperature, "because I am the CEO. Bradley leaned over the desk, crossing his arms. "Look, I don't have time for this today. We have a major weather system moving and ATC is breathing down my neck about departure slots, and I'm not in the mood for practical jokes. Take a seat in the waiting area over there by the vending machines until your actual boss arrives, or I will have security escort you out." Before Naomi could respond, the heavy glass doors to the tarmac swung open. A pilot strode in, flanked by a flight attendant. Captain Owen Helms was a man who looked like he had been cast in a movie about arrogant aviators. He wore his 4 stripes with an air of absolute superiority, his Ray-Ban aviators pushed up into his graying hair. Beside him was Tiffany Myers, a flight attendant whose perfectly applied red lipstick and crisp uniform matched her perfectly rehearsed, entirely fake smile. "Bradley," Owen barked as he walked toward the desk. "Tell me we have clearance. I'm not sitting on the tarmac for another hour waiting for Taterboro Ground Control to sort out their lives." "Working on it, Captain Helms," Bradley said, his tone instantly transforming from condescending to sycophantic. "We're just waiting on the primary passenger." Owen sighed heavily and looked around the lobby. His eyes landed on Naomi. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a woman standing in his way. He held out his half-empty disposable coffee cup. "Here," Owen said to Naomi, thrusting the cup toward her chest. "Toss this in the trash for me, and go tell the kitchen staff that they forgot the San Pellegrino. I specifically requested sparkling water, not still." Chop chop. Naomi did not take the cup. She stood perfectly still, her dark eyes locking onto the pilot's face. "I suggest you find a trash can yourself, Captain," Naomi said, her voice carrying a quiet, dangerous weight. Owen frowned, clearly taken aback by the refusal. He looked at Bradley. "Who is this? Why is the lounge staff giving me an attitude?" "She's not staff," Bradley sneered. "She claims she's the passenger, says she's the CEO of Apex Logistics." Tiffany, the flight attendant, let out a delicate, mocking giggle. She looked Naomi up and down. "Oh, honey, that's a good one. You know, impersonating a high-net-worth individual can actually get you arrested here." Tension hung in the air of the FBO lobby, thick and suffocating. Naomi stared at the 3 people in front of her. Bradley, the gatekeeper who assumed authority based on proximity to wealth. Owen, the pilot, who felt entitled to treat anyone out of uniform like a servant. Tiffany, the flight attendant who viewed herself as part of the elite class simply because she served them champagne at 40,000 feet. "I am not impersonating anyone," Naomi said, reaching into her bag to retrieve her passport and identification. "My name is Naomi Preston. I own Apex Logistics. I also own the Bombardier sitting on your tarmac." Bradley rolled his eyes, but just as Naomi placed her black diplomatic passport on the mahogany counter, the main entrance doors slid open with a dramatic swoosh. In walked Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was the heir to a massive real estate fortune, a man infamous in New York financial circles for his explosive temper, his loud tailored suits, and his staggering sense of entitlement. He was flanked by 2 nervous-looking assistants carrying garment bags and briefcases. "Bradley." Arthur boomed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "What in the hell is going on? My Gulfstream is grounded because of a mechanical issue. Do you know who I am? Do you know how much money I pump into this ridiculous airport?" Bradley instantly abandoned Naomi, literally shoving her passport to the side of the desk as he rushed to placate the angry billionaire. "Mr. Pendleton, sir, I am so incredibly sorry," Bradley stammered, bowing his head slightly. "It's a hydraulics issue on your G650. It's completely out of our hands. Safety first, sir. We are trying to find you a replacement charter right now." I don't want a replacement charter in an hour. I want a plane right now." Arthur slammed his fist on the reception desk. "I have a dinner in London tonight with the Prime Minister. If I don't make it, I will personally see to it that you are managing a rundown airstrip in the middle of nowhere." Bradley looked panicked. His eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking a solution. Then his gaze landed on Naomi, and a terrible career-ending idea formed in his mind. He looked at Captain Owen Helms. "Owen," Bradley said, lowering his voice, though not enough to prevent Naomi from hearing. The Apex Logistics flight, N884NP. It's fully fueled, prepped, and ready for a transatlantic jump, isn't it? Yes, Owen confirmed, crossing his arms. But it's a private aircraft, Bradley. It's owned by Apex Corporate. Apex is a massive corporation, Bradley whispered frantically. The actual CEO isn't here. Just this administrative girl trying to hitch a ride. We can bump her flight. I'll authorize an emergency charter takeover. Pendleton pays triple the going rate for the inconvenience. We route the money to the Apex Management Company to smooth things over, and you get to fly a VIP instead of ferrying empty seats. Owen stroked his chin, clearly considering it. The Global 7500 is a much nicer bird than the Gulfstream anyway, and I wouldn't mind the overtime bonus Pendleton is bound to throw my way. Excuse me, Naomi interrupted, her voice cutting through the lobby like a finely sharpened blade. You are not chartering my aircraft. Arthur Pendleton finally noticed Naomi standing there. He looked at her with utter disdain. Who is this Bradley? Why are the cleaning staff speaking to me? She's nobody, Mr. Pendleton, Bradley assured him quickly. Just a low-level employee from a corporate account who got her wires crossed. Sir, we have a solution. We have a top-of-the-line Bombardier Global 7500, prepped and ready on the tarmac. We are going to commandeer it for your flight to London. Arthur's face brightened. Excellent. This is why I use your FBO, Bradley. You know how to make things happen. Let's go. I want wheels up in 10 minutes. Arthur and his entourage began moving toward the tarmac doors. Owen and Tiffany fell into step behind them, eager to serve a man they deemed worthy of their attention. Naomi felt a cold, hard knot of pure adrenaline form in her stomach. This was beyond disrespect. This was outright theft. They were literally trying to steal her $70 million jet right in front of her because their own biases wouldn't allow them to believe she was the owner. Bradley, Naomi said, stepping directly into his path before he could escort Arthur to the door. If you authorize the boarding of my aircraft, I will not just sue you. I will dismantle your career. Bradley's face turned red. The sycophantic smile he had worn for Arthur vanished, replaced by an ugly, aggressive sneer. Listen to me very carefully, little girl, Bradley hissed, stepping into her personal space. I run this FBO. I decide who flies and who waits. Your company's jet is being chartered. You can take a commercial flight out of Newark like the rest of the working class. If you say one more word, I am calling Port Authority police to have you arrested for trespassing in a restricted VIP area. Naomi didn't flinch. She looked Bradley dead in the eyes. Call them, she said softly. Bradley scoffed, turning his back on her. Crazy. Unbelievable. He motioned for Arthur to follow him. Right this way, Mr. Pendleton. The jet is just outside. Naomi watched them walk through the glass doors onto the concrete apron. She took a deep breath, letting the cold logic of a seasoned CEO wash over her. She didn't need to yell. She didn't need to make a scene in the lobby. She needed to handle this on the tarmac. The biting wind hit Naomi as she stepped out of the FBO and onto the sprawling tarmac. The deafening roar of auxiliary power units from dozens of parked private jets filled the air. About 200 yards away, sitting perfectly on the concrete, was her pride and joy, the Bombardier Global 7500. Its sleek white fuselage gleamed under the afternoon sun, the navy blue tail bearing the subtle intertwined A and P of Apex Logistics. She walked with purpose, her white sneakers completely silent on the concrete. Ahead of her, Arthur Pendleton, his assistants Bradley, Owen, and Tiffany were walking toward the plane's lowered air stairs. Tiffany was already at the top of the stairs, unlocking the main cabin door and turning on the interior LED lights, ready to welcome the real VIPs aboard. Owen was standing at the base of the stairs, chatting amiably with Arthur. Naomi picked up her pace. As she neared the aircraft, one of the ground crew handlers, a young man in a neon safety vest holding 2 illuminated marshalling wands, stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, stop!" the young handler yelled over the engine noise. "You need a high-vis vest to be out here. This is a restricted zone." "Stand aside," Naomi commanded. There was a tone in her voice that brooked absolutely no argument, the tone of a woman who managed 60,000 employees worldwide. The young handler hesitated, then instinctively stepped back. Naomi reached the base of the stairs just as Arthur Pendleton was putting his foot on the first step. "Mr. Pendleton," Naomi said loudly, projecting her voice over the whine of the engines, "do not take another step onto my aircraft." Arthur stopped and turned around, his face purple with rage. "Bradley, I thought you handled this crazy woman. Why is she stalking us onto the tarmac?" Bradley came rushing over, his face pale with panic and fury. "Security. I need security out here right now." He screamed into a radio clipped to his belt. He lunged toward Naomi, trying to physically grab her arm to pull her away from the stairs. Naomi sidestepped him with practiced ease. "Do not touch me," she warned, her eyes flashing dangerously. Captain Owen Helms stormed down the remaining stairs, placing his large frame between Naomi and the entrance to the jet. He pointed a thick finger right in her face. "That is it," Owen barked. "I gave you a chance inside. Now you are interfering with flight operations. You are a security threat. The Port Authority police are on their way, and you are going to leave this airport in handcuffs." "Captain Helms, is it?" Naomi asked, her voice eerily calm despite the chaos. "That's right," Owen sneered. "And you are nothing but a massive headache. Get away from my plane." "Your plane," Naomi repeated, a bitter, humorless smile touching her lips. She looked up the stairs where Tiffany was watching the scene with a smirk, clearly enjoying the show. Naomi then looked at Arthur Pendleton, who was tapping his expensive cane impatiently on the tarmac. "This aircraft," Naomi said, her voice carrying absolute authority, "features the Nuage seating system, a per-air cabin purification system, and GE passport engines. I know this because I sat in the Bombardier facility in Montreal and picked out every single detail myself. I signed the $72 million wire transfer. This plane belongs to me." "Lady, you belong in a psych ward," Arthur yelled. "Bradley, if I am not in the air in 5 minutes, I am pulling all my business from this FBO," sirens wailed in the distance. 2 Port Authority police cruisers with flashing red and blue lights were speeding across the tarmac toward N8, 84NP. Bradley looked triumphant. "Here come the cops. You're done. You're going to jail for trespassing and interfering with an active flight." Naomi looked down at her Rolex Daytona. The second hand swept gracefully past the 12. The time was exactly 2:41 p.m. "You know," Naomi said, speaking quietly enough that only Bradley, Owen, and Arthur could hear her, "I built my company on the principle of extreme efficiency. I believe that mistakes can be forgiven, but deliberate incompetence and arrogance must be eradicated immediately." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her smartphone. She didn't call the police. She didn't call her lawyer. She bypassed all of that and opened her contacts, dialing a number she had saved for absolute emergencies. The number belonged to William Vance. Wait, no. She recalled she must not use certain names. The number belonged to William Sterling. No, she couldn't use that either. The number belonged to Thomas Croft. Thomas was the CEO of Elite Aviation Management, the high-end firm that Naomi paid millions a year to staff, maintain, and house her private jet. Elite Aviation employed Captain Owen Helms and Tiffany Myers. Elite Aviation also held the master lease for the FBO building that Bradley Harrison managed. Thomas Croft answered on the second ring. "Naomi." Thomas's warm voice came through the speaker. "Please tell me you are comfortably in the air on your way to Geneva." "I am standing on the tarmac at Taterborough, Thomas," Naomi said, keeping her eyes locked on Captain Owen Helms. "Is there a mechanical issue with the Bombardier?" Thomas asked, concern instantly spiking in his voice. "No, the plane is fine," Naomi replied. "The issue is your staff. Your FBO manager, Bradley Harrison, and my assigned pilot, Captain Owen Helms, have refused me entry to my own aircraft. They assumed I was a low-level employee based on my appearance, and they are currently attempting to illegally charter my plane to a man named Arthur Pendleton." There was dead silence on the line for 3 full seconds, the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. "Naomi," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper, "tell me you are joking." "The Port Authority police are pulling up right now," Naomi continued calmly watching the two cruisers skid to a halt near the jet. Officers were jumping out their hands, resting cautiously on their belts. Your pilot threatened to have me arrested. Your FBO manager tried to physically grab me. I am going to destroy them. Thomas breathed the sheer panic evident in his voice. Apex Logistics was his firm's largest account. Losing Naomi Preston would bankrupt Elite Aviation. Naomi, please hand the phone to Captain Helms. No, Naomi said. No, Thomas asked, confused. Naomi checked her watch again. It was 2:42 p.m. I am not interested in hearing them apologize to save their jobs, Naomi stated, her voice hard as diamond. I am giving you an ultimatum, Thomas. You have exactly 9 minutes to terminate Bradley Harrison, Captain Owen Helms, and the flight attendant Tiffany Myers. I want them stripped of their badges, their access revoked, and I want them escorted off this airport property. If they are still standing on this tarmac at 2:51 p.m., I am canceling my management contract with Elite Aviation, pulling my fleet, and I will personally bankrupt your firm in breach of contract litigation. Naomi lowered the phone from her ear. She pressed the speakerphone button, turning the volume all the way up so the entire group could hear. Do you understand me, Thomas? Naomi asked into the phone. The voice that boomed out of the speaker made Captain Owen Helms's face drain of all color. Understood, Ms. Preston. Thomas Croft's voice echoed across the tarmac, laced with pure, unadulterated fury. It will be done immediately. Naomi hung up the phone. She slipped it back into her pocket and looked at the police officers who had just walked up. Is there a problem here? The lead officer asked, looking between the angry white men and the calm black woman standing her ground. Before Bradley could spew his lies, Naomi raised her hand. Officers, Naomi said politely, there is no problem. We are just waiting for a few recent terminations to be finalized before I board my plane. The countdown had begun. They had 8 minutes left. Silence, heavy and absolute, descended upon the tarmac, broken only by the relentless, high-pitched whine of the nearby jet engines. The bravado that had puffed up Bradley's chest just moments before seemed to evaporate into the chilly autumn air. He stared at Naomi's phone, then at her utterly composed face, his brain struggling to process the reality of what had just occurred. Arthur Pendleton, however, was not used to being ignored or delayed. He slammed the silver tip of his cane against the concrete. What kind of amateur hour is this? Arthur bellowed, turning his fury toward Bradley. Who was on that phone, and why are these officers just standing here? Arrest this lunatic so we can leave. Sergeant Miller, a seasoned Port Authority police officer with graying temples and zero tolerance for billionaire temper tantrums, stepped forward. He held up a gloved hand, cutting Arthur off mid-rant. Sir, I suggest you lower your voice, Sergeant Miller said firmly. He then turned his attention to Naomi. Ma'am, can I see some identification? Bradley jumped at the opening, his desperation making his voice crack. Officer, she's a fraud. She's a low-level clerk trying to hijack a private charter. That phone call was probably just her boyfriend pretending to be corporate. Arrest her for trespassing. Naomi didn't bother looking at Bradley. She calmly reached into her battered leather duffel bag and withdrew 2 items, her black diplomatic passport and a thick blue leather-bound folder bearing the seal of the Federal Aviation Administration. She handed both to Sergeant Miller. Bina? My name is Naomi Preston, she stated, her voice projecting clearly over the tarmac noise. I am the founder and CEO of Apex Freight and Logistics. Inside that folder is the FAA Certificate of Registration for the Bombardier Global 7500 sitting right there. Tail number N884NP. You will see the registered owner is Apex Logistics LLC, and I am the sole signatory. Sergeant Miller opened the passport, glanced at Naomi, and then opened the FAA folder. His eyes scanned the official documentation. A slow, knowing nod followed. He closed the folder, handed the items back to Naomi with a respectful nod, and then turned his stern gaze toward Bradley and Captain Owen Helms. Looks like the lady owns the plane, boys, Sergeant Miller said dryly, which means she isn't trespassing. But if she wants you off her property, you're the ones who are going to have a problem. Captain Owen Helms swallowed hard. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale beneath his aviator sunglasses. He had recognized Thomas Croft's voice on the speakerphone. Every pilot at Elite Aviation knew the CEO's voice. It wasn't a prank. He had just threatened to arrest the woman who effectively paid his salary. Naomi checked her Rolex. 2:44 p.m., she announced to the group. 7 minutes. "Naomi, Ms. Preston!" "Listen." Owen stammered, his arrogant pilot persona crumbling into pathetic backpedaling. He took a step toward her, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "This was all a massive misunderstanding. Bradley told me you were just an administrative assistant. I was operating under the FBO's directives. We have flight protocols, security measures. Captain Helms." Naomi interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You told me to throw away your garbage. You ordered me to fetch your sparkling water. Did Bradley instruct you to do that as well, or was that your own personal protocol for treating people you consider beneath you?" Owen opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. He looked to Bradley for backup, but the FBO manager was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically between the police officers and the plane. Suddenly, a loud, piercing ringtone shattered the tension. It was coming from Owen's uniform pocket. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands. The screen displayed a caller ID that made his stomach drop into his shoes. Thomas Croft, CEO/Elite Aviation. "Answer it," Naomi commanded softly. Owen swiped the screen and brought the phone to his ear. "Mr. Croft, sir, I can explain." He didn't get to finish his sentence. Even standing several feet away, Naomi and the police officers could hear the muffled explosive shouting emanating from the phone's earpiece. Thomas Croft was not a man who tolerated losing millions of dollars, and he was currently unleashing the full force of a corporate hurricane directly into his pilot's ear. "Sir, please," Owen begged, practically folding in on himself. "I have a perfect safety record. I've been with the company for 10 years. It was the FBO manager's idea to charter the plane to Pendleton, not mine. I was just..." More shouting from the phone. Owen's shoulders slumped. He closed his eyes, a look of profound defeat washing over his features. "Yes, sir," Owen whispered into the receiver. "Understood." He slowly lowered the phone. The device slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered onto the tarmac. He looked at Naomi, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and devastation. 6 minutes, Naomi said, her face an unreadable mask. "I suggest you start walking." Panic is a fascinating emotion to witness in real time. It strips away titles, tailored suits, and unearned confidence, leaving only raw, unfiltered desperation behind. Bradley Harrison was currently swimming in it. Seeing the mighty Captain Helms reduced to a stammering fired mess sent Bradley into a state of sheer denial. He unclipped the heavy radio from his belt, his thumb mashing the transmission button. "Security desk. This is Bradley. I need a direct line to regional management right now," he yelled into the device. The radio hissed with static. A voice came back, but it wasn't the local security desk. It was Gregory Patterson, the vice president of Elite Aviation's East Coast operations. "Bradley, this is Gregory. Stand down immediately." The voice barked through the radio speaker loud enough for everyone to hear. "Gregory, thank God." Bradley practically sobbed into the microphone. "There's a crazy situation on the tarmac. A passenger is having a meltdown, and Croft is making rash decisions over a misunderstanding. You need to talk to him." "There is no misunderstanding, Bradley." Gregory's voice echoed with cold, clinical detachment. "I just got off the conference call with Thomas Croft and our legal team. You attempted to illegally charter a privately owned aircraft without the owner's consent, violating FAA regulations, company policy, and basic common sense. You have exposed Elite Aviation to massive legal liability. I was trying to accommodate Mr. Pendleton." Bradley pleaded, gesturing wildly toward the billionaire who was suddenly looking very uncomfortable. "It was an executive decision to maximize revenue." "You don't make executive decisions regarding $60 million assets that don't belong to us," Gregory retorted sharply. "Effective immediately, your employment with Elite Aviation is terminated with cause. You are to hand over your master keys, your security credentials, and your company radio to the Port Authority officers on site. If you step foot on any elite aviation property again, you will be arrested for criminal trespass. You can't do this, I run this FBO, Bradley screamed at the radio. The transmission is over, Mr. Harrison, Gregory stated. The radio clicked, followed by dead air. Bradley stared at the device in his hand as if it had turned into a venomous snake. Sergeant Miller stepped forward, extending his hand. I'll take the radio, the keys, and the badge, son. The officer said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Right now, defeated, his chest heaving with panicked breaths, Bradley unclipped his badge and handed it over, along with his master keys and the radio. In less than 5 minutes, he had gone from the undisputed king of the VIP lounge to an unemployed man facing potential civil lawsuits. Up at the top of the aircraft stairs, Tiffany Myers finally realized something was horribly wrong. She had been waiting in the doorway expecting to greet Arthur Pendleton with warm towels and champagne. Instead, she saw a police presence, her captain dropping his phone and the FBO manager being stripped of his credentials. She trotted down the air stairs, her high heels clicking rapidly against the metal steps. Captain Helms, what is going on? Tiffany asked, her perfect fake smile finally faltering. She looked at Naomi. Why is she still here, Mr. Pendleton? We are ready for boarding whenever security clears this woman out. Owen didn't look at her. He just stared blankly at the concrete. Naomi stepped toward the stairs. She looked Tiffany up and down, mirroring the exact same condescending gaze the flight attendant had given her in the lobby. Tiffany was it? Naomi asked. Yes, Tiffany said, crossing her arms defensively. And I don't know who you think you are, but you are delaying a very important flight. I am the owner of this aircraft, Naomi said. The words hit Tiffany like a physical blow. The flight attendant's mouth fell open, her eyes darting to Owen for confirmation. The former pilot just gave a miserable microscopic nod. Furthermore, Naomi continued, her voice devoid of any sympathy. I just received an email from your corporate office. She tapped the screen of her phone, reading the newly arrived message. It seems Elite Aviation has zero tolerance for crew members who participate in the unauthorized chartering of private jets or who mock high-net-worth clients in the lobby. Your employment has also been terminated. What? Tiffany gasped, her manicured hands flying to her mouth. No, I didn't do anything. I was just following the captain's lead. You giggled, Naomi stated bluntly. You enjoyed watching me be degraded. You are welcome to retrieve your personal belongings from the cabin. You have exactly 2 minutes to do so. Tiffany burst into tears, turning and fleeing up the stairs to grab her tote bag. With the 3 employees dealt with, Naomi slowly turned her attention to the last piece of the puzzle, Arthur Pendleton. The loud, arrogant billionaire had grown suspiciously quiet over the last few minutes. As he watched the brutal surgical dismantling of the airport staff, the gears in his head had finally started turning. He looked at Naomi, really looked at her, and the pieces snapped together. Apex Freight and Logistics, Arthur said softly, his voice devoid of its previous bluster. You're Naomi Preston. I am, Naomi confirmed. Arthur's face flushed a deep, embarrassed crimson. Pendleton Commercial Real Estate, his massive property empire, owned millions of square feet of industrial warehousing across the eastern seaboard. Apex Logistics was his single largest commercial tenant. They leased over 12 massive distribution centers from his firm. He had just called the CEO of his Golden Goose a lunatic and tried to steal her ride. Ms. Preston. Arthur started forcing a stiff, awkward smile onto his face. He stepped forward, extending a hand. I must apologize. I had no idea who you were. The staff here completely misled me. The pressure of my London meeting clouded my judgment. Obviously, we do a tremendous amount of business together, and I would hate for this unfortunate mix-up to sour our professional relationship. Naomi looked at his outstretched hand. She did not take it. It wasn't a mix-up, Arthur, Naomi said, her voice echoing with chilling finality. It was a revealing display of character. You saw a young black woman standing in your way, and you automatically assumed I was a nuisance to be swatted aside. You didn't care who I was until you realized I had power over your bottom line. Arthur's hand slowly dropped to his side. Naomi, please. Let's be reasonable. Business is business. Yes, it is, Naomi agreed. And my business requires reliable, respectful partners. Our lease on the Newark, Atlanta, and Charlotte distribution centers expires in 8 months. I was going to authorize the renewals this week. Arthur swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. Ms. Preston, Biofason. I will be instructing my real estate acquisitions team to begin looking for alternative facilities tomorrow morning, Naomi said seamlessly. Apex Logistics will no longer be leasing property from Pendleton Commercial Real Estate. We are done. Arthur opened his mouth completely stunned. He had just lost hundreds of millions of dollars in guaranteed long-term revenue because he couldn't wait an hour for a replacement jet. He looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked rapidly back toward the terminal, his assistants scrambling to keep up. Naomi checked her watch one final time. The second hand swept past the 12. 2:51 p.m., Naomi announced. She looked up. Tiffany was walking down the stairs carrying her bags, her makeup ruined by tears. Bradley was standing near the police cruiser, looking completely broken. Owen was picking his hat up off the tarmac. Officers, Naomi said to Sergeant Miller, the time limit has expired. These 3 individuals are no longer employed by the management company, which means they are now trespassing on a restricted tarmac. Please escort them off the airport property. With pleasure, ma'am, Sergeant Miller smiled. He gestured to his partner and the 2 officers began corralling the fired staff toward the back of the police cruisers. Naomi didn't stay to watch them leave. She had a company to run. She picked up her battered leather duffel bag, adjusted her cashmere sweater, and walked up the air stairs of her $70 million jet. Karma had been delivered right on schedule. Bradley Harrison sat in the center of his aggressively modern, heavily financed Hoboken apartment, staring at his laptop screen until his vision blurred. It was Monday morning, exactly 48 hours since he had been unceremoniously shoved into the back of a Port Authority police cruiser and dumped at the edge of the Teterboro airport perimeter. The silence in his apartment was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaotic high-stakes hum of the VIP lounge he used to rule. He refreshed his inbox for the 100th time. He was waiting for a lifeline, perhaps an email from a sympathetic regional manager at Elite Aviation saying it was all a terrible mistake or that Thomas Croft had cooled off over the weekend. Instead, a new email materialized. The sender was the legal department of Elite Aviation. Bradley's hand trembled as he clicked it open. It was not a severance package. It was a formal notice of intent to sue. The document outlined in terrifying legal precision how his actions constituted a gross breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized attempted misuse of a client asset, and reckless endangerment of the company's largest corporate contract. They were holding him personally liable for the financial damages incurred during the 90 minutes the Bombardier Global 7500 was delayed, plus legal fees. They can't do this, Bradley whispered to the empty room, his chest tightening. I was just a manager. But reality was crashing down with the weight of a falling anvil. Bradley lived a lifestyle entirely built on the illusion of proximity to wealth. His luxury apartment, his leased German sports car, his designer suits, all of it was funded by a salary that was now gone heavily leveraged by credit card debt. He assumed he could always pay off with his generous end-of-year bonuses. Without his badge, without his title, he was nothing but a man drowning in high-interest debt. Across the Hudson River in a cramped, dark, wood-paneled bar in Queens, Captain Owen Helms was experiencing his own brand of absolute devastation. He had spent the entire weekend burning through his contact list, calling every chief pilot, aviation director, and flight department manager he had met over his 30-year career. Private aviation was a notoriously insular community. If you were a good pilot who knew how to keep your mouth shut and fly the plane smoothly, you would always have a job. But if you became a liability, you were radioactive. Owen took a slow, bitter sip of his bourbon. His phone sat silently on the sticky bar top. Out of 42 phone calls, only 3 people had answered. The first was a buddy who flew for a fractional ownership company. He told Owen that the rumor mill at Teterboro was operating at light speed. The story wasn't just that Owen got fired. The story was that he tried to hijack a billionaire's plane because he was too lazy to check the manifest and then threatened to have the owner arrested. The second call was his union representative who delivered the most fatal blow, Owen. I reviewed the preliminary report from Elite Aviation. The rep had said, his voice laced with pity. You attempted to authorize a charter for a Part 91 privately owned aircraft without the registered owner's consent or a signed dry lease agreement. That is a massive FAA violation. Thomas Croft didn't just fire you, he self-reported the incident to the Federal Aviation Administration to save his company's operating certificate. They are opening an investigation into your pilot credentials. I strongly advise you to retain an aviation attorney because they might suspend your license. Owen had hung up the phone and walked straight to the bar. He was 58 years old. He didn't know how to do anything else but fly. His arrogant assumption that Naomi Preston was a low-level clerk hadn't just cost him his job, it had stripped away his entire identity. Meanwhile, high above the streets of Manhattan in a glass-walled boardroom, a different kind of execution was taking place. Arthur Pendleton stood at the head of a massive mahogany table, his usually booming voice reduced to a defensive, stammering rasp. Around the table sat the board of directors for Pendleton Commercial Real Estate. They did not look happy. "Arthur, I want to make sure I am understanding this correctly," said Margaret, the oldest and most ruthless board member, peering at him over her reading glasses. "You are telling us that Apex Logistics, our largest anchor tenant, representing over 40% of our guaranteed industrial revenue for the next decade, has officially withdrawn their lease renewal applications." "Torrance, Margaret, it's a temporary setback," Arthur pleaded, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "It was a personal misunderstanding at the airport. I'm reaching out to Naomi Preston's office today to smooth things over. I will offer them a 5% reduction on the base rent to show good faith." A misunderstanding. Another board member scoffed, tossing a printed financial brief onto the table. "I got a call from a contact at a rival commercial firm this morning. Apex's acquisition team is aggressively touring their properties in Newark and Atlanta. They aren't posturing, Arthur. They are leaving." "I can fix this," Arthur insisted, his face turning a blotchy red. "I just need to get her on the phone." "You insulted the CEO of a $70 billion supply chain empire because you were throwing a tantrum over a delayed flight," Margaret said, coldly closing her leather binder. "You treated her like garbage, and she responded exactly how a titan of industry should. She cut the dead weight. The board is convening an emergency session tomorrow morning, Arthur, and your position as chairman is the first item on the agenda." Arthur sank into his leather chair, the air completely knocked out of his lungs. The brutal machinery of corporate karma had caught up to all of them, indifferent to their excuses and immune to their arrogance. Desperation breeds severe lapses in judgment. When people are backed into a corner and stripped of everything they hold dear, they rarely accept accountability. Instead, they look for a scapegoat. 1 week after the incident at Teterboro, Bradley Harrison and Owen Helms sat in a dingy diner in Newark drinking terrible coffee and plotting. Tiffany Myers, the flight attendant, had wisely decided to cut her losses, block their numbers, and move back to Ohio. But Bradley and Owen were too arrogant and too ruined to walk away quietly. "We have to go to the press," Bradley said, his eyes bloodshot, a thick layer of stubble coating his jaw. "Elite Aviation is trying to bankrupt me. Your license is suspended. We have nothing left to lose. We need to spin the narrative." Owen looked skeptical, stirring his coffee slowly. "And say what, Bradley, that we accidentally tried to steal a plane. How does that make us look good?" "We don't talk about the charter," Bradley urged, leaning across the sticky table. "We focus on the abuse of power. We paint Naomi Preston as an out-of-control elitist billionaire who threw a hysterical tantrum over a cup of coffee and destroyed the lives of hard-working blue-collar airport workers. The media loves a story about the ultra-rich stepping on the working class. If we make enough noise, Elite Aviation will drop the lawsuit to make the PR nightmare go away, and maybe the FAA backs off your case. It was a terrible plan built on a foundation of lies and fueled by victimhood. But to a drowning man, even a poisonous snake looks like a rope. 2 days later, a highly sensationalized article dropped on a prominent aggressive digital tabloid site. The headline blared in massive, bold font, "Billionaire Tyrant Fires. Entire flight crew over a cup of coffee. She treated us like dirt," says devastated pilot. The article was a masterpiece of selective framing. It featured a somber black and white photo of Owen in his uniform, looking solemnly into the distance, and a quote from Bradley claiming he was physically intimidated by Naomi's security detail, a detail that didn't even exist. The story claimed Naomi had screamed at them, hurled insults, and demanded they be fired immediately because her sparkling water was missing. It painted her as an unstable, tyrannical diva. For about 4 hours, the strategy seemed to work. The story gained traction on social media. People who knew nothing about aviation regulations or the truth of the encounter began retweeting the article, adding angry comments about eating the rich and demanding justice for the poor fired pilot. In Geneva, Switzerland, Naomi Preston sat in the quiet luxury of her hotel suite, sipping a cup of chamomile tea and reviewing quarterly projection reports. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her chief communications officer. "Check your email. We have a PR situation." The fired Teterboro crew went to the tabloids. Naomi calmly opened her laptop and read the article. She didn't frown. She didn't shout. She just let out a soft, amused sigh. "Amateurs," she murmured to the empty room. She picked up her phone and dialed her communications director. "Did you read it, Naomi?" the director asked, sounding stressed. "It's gaining momentum. We need to draft a statement immediately. A measured apology for any misunderstandings or hurt feelings, while clarifying that personnel decisions were made by the management company, not you." "No apologies," Naomi said firmly. "I will not apologize for defending my property and demanding basic respect. They want to play in the mud. We are going to bury them in concrete." "What's the play, boss? Call the legal department." Naomi instructed her mind, working with the cold efficiency that had built her empire. "Have them subpoena the security footage from the Teterboro FBO lobby. Elite Aviation will hand it over immediately. They are terrified of losing our contract. The cameras in that VIP lounge are state-of-the-art. They record high-definition video and crisp audio. Get the footage of them mocking me, ignoring my passport, and explicitly discussing chartering my plane to Arthur Pendleton behind my back. Brilliant," the director breathed. "And the tarmac, Auburn." "I have the tarmac footage already," Naomi said. "My Bombardier is equipped with a 360-degree exterior security camera system that runs whenever the APU is engaged. It caught the entire confrontation by the air stairs. I want you to splice the lobby footage together with the plane's security footage. Add clear subtitles so nobody misses a single word of their blatant racism and attempted theft. Do not editorialize it. Do not add dramatic music. Just release the raw, unvarnished truth." "Where do we release it?" "Everywhere," Naomi replied. "Send it directly to the journalist who wrote that hit piece. Send it to the major networks. Post it on our corporate social channels with a single sentence: Apex Logistics stands against incompetence, discrimination, and theft." Within 6 hours, the internet's mood snapped back like a violently released rubber band. The video dropped. It was undeniable. Millions of viewers watched in high definition as Bradley rolled his eyes and refused to look at Naomi's passport. They heard the crystal-clear audio of Tiffany giggling and Owen barking, "Toss this in the trash for me, and go tell the kitchen staff that they forgot the San Pellegrino." But the real fatal blow was the conversation between Bradley and Owen. The public listened in absolute shock as the two men actively conspired to steal a $70 million jet from a black woman standing right in front of them simply because they couldn't fathom she was the owner, choosing instead to cater to a screaming wealthy white man. The backlash was biblical. The tabloid that published the original article frantically deleted it, issuing a groveling retraction and an apology to Naomi Preston. But the internet never forgets. The video went viral globally, dissecting every microaggression, every sneer, and every lie Bradley and Owen had told. For Bradley, the digital mob was ruthless. His social media accounts were flooded with thousands of angry comments. His name became synonymous with entitled incompetence. When he tried to apply for a basic management job at a retail store a week later, the hiring manager took one look at his name, recognized him from the viral video, and asked him to leave the building. Elite Aviation, emboldened by the public support for Naomi, expedited their lawsuit, legally seizing Bradley's remaining assets and forcing him into bankruptcy. For Owen, the consequences were career-ending. The FAA investigators watched the viral video. Hearing a licensed captain agree to an illegal charter just to get overtime bonuses from a random billionaire was all they needed. His pilot's license wasn't just suspended, it was permanently revoked. The man who loved the sky was permanently grounded, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale taught in flight school ethics classes. As for Arthur Pendleton, the viral video didn't feature his worst moments, but the corporate world knew exactly who the angry billionaire in the background was. With his reputation tarnished and his company's revenue heavily damaged by the loss of the Apex contract, his board of directors voted unanimously to oust him. He was forced into early retirement, stripped of his power, and left to play golf in angry isolation. Naomi Preston never spoke of the incident again. She didn't give interviews about it, and she didn't gloat. She simply continued to run her empire, flying across the globe in her pristine Bombardier Global 7500. She had proven a timeless, brutal rule of life. Arrogance is a debt, and eventually karma comes to collect with interest. 6 months after the viral incident that permanently rearranged the power dynamics at Teterboro Airport, the brutal machinery of corporate justice was still grinding the offenders into dust. Winter had descended upon Manhattan, wrapping the skyscrapers in biting wind and gray frost. Inside a heavily soundproofed mediation room on the 45th floor of a high-end corporate law firm, Bradley Harrison was sweating through a cheap off-the-rack suit. He sat across from Thomas Croft, the CEO of Elite Aviation, and a phalanx of 3 stone-faced corporate litigators. Bradley's own attorney, a public defender he had barely managed to secure after maxing out his last credit card, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. The lawsuit Elite Aviation had brought against Bradley was monstrous. They were suing him for gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and severe brand damage. The viral video had cost Elite Aviation 2 major corporate accounts, both of whom pulled their fleets citing security and management incompetence. Mr. Harrison. Jonathan Carmichael, the lead attorney for Elite Aviation, began, his voice dripping with aristocratic boredom. We are prepared to offer a settlement. We will drop the demand for the $3 million in damages which we know you do not have. Bradley let out a pathetic, shuddering sigh of relief. Thank you. Oh, thank God. I just want to move on with my life. Do not interrupt me. Jonathan snapped, his eyes flashing like polished steel. We will drop the financial damages on 3 conditions. First, you will immediately surrender all remaining assets in your investment portfolio to cover our legal fees. Second, you will sign a lifetime non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement regarding Elite Aviation, Apex Logistics, and Naomi Preston. And third, you will formally withdraw the intellectual property claim you filed yesterday. Bradley's blood ran cold. His relief evaporated, replaced by a sickening wave of nausea. In a desperate 11th-hour bid to save himself from bankruptcy, Bradley had quietly contacted a producer at a major streaming network. He wanted to sell the exclusive life rights to his side of the Teterboro story, hoping to cash in on a limited docuseries about the perils of cancel culture. It was his golden parachute, his only way to pay off the massive debt he had accrued trying to maintain a billionaire lifestyle on a manager's salary. How did you know about the producer? Bradley stammered, his hands shaking so violently he had to hide them under the mahogany table. Because Naomi Preston's holding company owns a 40% stake in that network's parent corporation, Thomas Croft said, speaking for the first time. The CEO looked at Bradley with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. Did you really think you could outmaneuver the woman whose jet you tried to steal? She doesn't just own planes, Bradley. She owns the infrastructure. The producer kicked your proposal up the chain of command and it landed directly on Ms. Preston's desk. She forwarded it to us. Bradley leaned back in his chair, all the fight completely leaving his body. He was checkmated. There was no docu-series. There was no redemption arc. There was only ruin. With a trembling hand, he picked up a heavy Mont Blanc pen from the table and signed the settlement agreement, legally signing away his voice, his savings, and his future. While Bradley was signing his financial death warrant, a different kind of execution was taking place in a boardroom a few miles south in the financial district. Arthur Pendleton, the once feared real estate titan, was standing at the end of a long polished table packing his personal belongings into a cardboard box. The board of directors had not just removed him from his position as chairman, they had forced a buyout of his majority shares at a brutally low valuation. Arthur had tried to fight the ouster, leveraging his political connections and calling in old favors. He attempted a hostile counter-takeover to regain control of his empire. But Naomi Preston had not forgotten his arrogance on the tarmac. When Naomi learned of Arthur's attempt to claw his way back, she made a single phone call to her private equity partners. Within 48 hours, Naomi's coalition had quietly purchased the debt on 3 of Arthur's most heavily leveraged commercial properties. When Arthur tried to refinance to fund his proxy war, the banks influenced by Naomi's massive capital weight called the loans in entirely. Arthur was financially cornered. He had to liquidate his shares just to avoid personal bankruptcy. He placed a framed photograph of his grounded Gulfstream jet into the cardboard box. His hands, usually so steady when pointing fingers and shouting orders, were weak and trembling. He looked around the boardroom. He had built a room that now belonged to a faceless corporate trust. He walked out of the glass doors carrying his box to the elevator. There was no entourage. There were no sycophantic assistants rushing to press the elevator button for him. He was just an old, angry man who had forgotten that wealth does not grant you immunity from consequence. When he stepped out onto the cold pavement of Wall Street, he hailed a yellow cab. For the first time in 30 years, Arthur Pendleton did not have a private driver waiting for him. Autumn returned to Teterboro, painting the trees bordering the airport in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The biting wind still carried the scent of jet fuel, and the auxiliary power units still whined like mechanical beasts waiting to be unleashed. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the FBO terminal, the very same building where chaos had erupted exactly 1 year prior. The driver stepped out, opening the rear door. Naomi Preston stepped onto the pavement. She was dressed almost exactly as she had been the year before, a luxurious, oversized cashmere sweater, tailored black leggings, and perfectly white sneakers. Her hair was pulled back into that same no-nonsense bun, and the vintage Rolex Daytona glinted on her wrist. She carried the battered leather duffel bag that had been with her since the beginning. She didn't dress to impress anyone. She dressed like a woman who already owned the room. As she pushed through the heavy glass doors into the marble-floored lobby, the atmosphere was completely different. The air of arrogant elitism was gone, replaced by a hyper-efficient, respectful professionalism. Behind the mahogany reception desk stood Sarah Jenkins, the newly appointed FBO operations manager. Sarah was sharp, attentive, and incredibly good at her job. When the glass doors opened, Sarah didn't look at Naomi's clothes. She looked at her eyes, recognizing the CEO instantly. "Good afternoon, Ms. Preston." Sarah greeted her, smile genuine and warm. She stepped out from behind the desk. "Welcome back to Teterboro. Captain Mitchell and the crew have N884NP fully prepped, catered to your exact specifications, and ready for your transatlantic flight to London. Your ATC clearance is already locked in." "Thank you, Sarah." Naomi smiled back. "Any issues with the ground control today?" None at all, ma'am, Sarah assured her, walking Naomi toward the tarmac doors without ever asking for ID, a corporate authorization form, or throwing a coffee cup at her. We have a clear corridor. Your luggage has already been loaded by the ground team. The tarmac is yours. Naomi walked through the glass doors, the cold autumn wind whipping her hair. Sitting perfectly on the concrete apron gleaming under the afternoon sun was her $70 million Bombardier Global 7500. At the base of the air stairs stood Captain David Mitchell, a veteran pilot with an impeccable safety record and a reputation for treating every single person on the tarmac, from the billionaires down to the fuel truck operators, with unwavering respect. Beside him stood the new flight attendant, a professional who understood that luxury service was about grace, not condescension. "Good afternoon, Ms. Preston," Captain Mitchell said, offering a crisp, respectful nod. "Engines are warm and the cabin is set to 72 degrees. We are ready whenever you are." "Let's go, Captain," Naomi said, walking up the air stairs. She paused at the top of the stairs, turning around to look out over the sprawling expanse of Teterboro Airport. Hundreds of private jets sat parked, representing billions of dollars in wealth and power. But Naomi knew better than anyone that all the money in the world couldn't buy character. 10 miles away, stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic on the crumbling asphalt of Interstate 95, a beat-up diesel-spewing delivery truck crawled forward. The man behind the wheel was wearing a stained blue-collar uniform, his face lined with deep exhaustion and profound regret. Owen Helms gripped the sticky steering wheel of the box truck. Without his pilot's license completely blacklisted from the aviation community and drowning in legal debt from his failed attempt to sue the FAA, he had been forced to take a job driving overnight regional freight for a low-tier logistics company. The heater in the truck was broken, and the bitter autumn chill seeped through the floorboards. Owen let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his tired eyes. He heard a familiar, powerful roar echoing from the sky above. He leaned forward, looking up through the dirty windshield. High above the traffic, climbing rapidly through the clouds with majestic, effortless grace, was a pristine white Bombardier, Global 7500. Even from this distance, Owen could make out the distinct intertwined A and P of the Apex Logistics logo painted on the navy blue tail. He watched the jet soar higher and higher, cutting through the atmosphere, heading eastward toward Europe. A bitter lump formed in Owen's throat. He knew exactly who was sitting in that hyper-luxurious cabin. He remembered the calm, terrifyingly cold voice of the woman who had warned him, the woman who had given him exactly 9 minutes to save his career, a warning he had arrogantly ignored. Owen shifted the heavy gears of the box truck, his foot pressing down on the stiff accelerator, to move another 10 feet in the endless traffic jam. He was grounded, anchored to the dirt and the exhaust fumes, while the woman he had treated like a servant ruled the sky. Back on the plane, Naomi Preston settled into the plush leather of the Nuage seating system. She didn't think about Owen Helms, Bradley Harrison, or Arthur Pendleton. They were ghosts of the past, insignificant bumps in the road that she had flattened and paved over without a second thought. She opened her laptop, connecting to the high-speed satellite internet, and began reviewing the acquisition paperwork for her next massive global expansion. The twin GE Passport engines roared to life, a symphony of engineered perfection. The massive jet rolled down the runway, gathering incredible speed, before lifting smoothly into the sky, leaving the ground and the people who belonged there far behind. What did you think of Naomi's brutal but necessary display of power? This story proves that true authority doesn't require shouting. It requires setting unbreakable boundaries and delivering ruthless consequences to those who disrespect them. Karma has a massive, undefeated track record, and it always comes to collect. If you loved witnessing this epic takedown of arrogance and want more thrilling stories of instant karma and corporate justice, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder to never judge a book by its cover, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible, satisfying stories.